Yeah, so we've talked a couple times on the podcast previously about one of our impressions from some of the Christian pop culture that came around in the 90s, and how one of the biggest problems was that it was kind of the production values were cheap. It gave things a bad reputation, right? People have a bad taste in their mouth for Christian storytelling because I think there was a lot of it that was done without very good production value, without commitment to doing a good product. If you're making a comic book, you need to make sure that the art is actually a high quality tier of artwork, that it has a comic book style to it so that people like it. And I love that what you're doing, and when you're talking about like investigating so that it's got historical accurate in terms of basically production design.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like you look at things like the Left Behind movies and some of that stuff that was done that had a fairly big push within the Christian community, when at least when I was
I
younger.
remember
And
those books. Yeah.
yeah, and those books were huge because the books were able, it's a book, you're able to paint a picture and spend a lot of pages on it. When they tried to translate it into a different story medium like film, they cut the budgets. Maybe that's all they could do to get it to happen, but it suffered because of it. And I think that for 20 years, people who have been trying to get movies with Christian themes off the ground have been fighting that bad taste that was left by that stuff. And I think that I like that what you're doing. The main thing that people, I think, always bring up to me whenever I talk about that is just they have a feeling and a memory of it being cheap and not entertaining to the level that they're used to.
I could not agree more. And we combat that every day. And it's our thought that someone has to be the first, right? Someone has to turn that tide and go, no, I'm going to step out on faith. We're going to put what this story is worth into this story, and I'm going to try and turn that tide by showing the world that, no, Christians can produce top quality art. Christians can produce top quality story. We can bring the best in terms of marketing. Both Brainy Pixel and Mercy Waves, we look at everything we produce first and foremost as an offering to God.
There's also, when we talk about Christian media, religious media, there is this subtext that it's also needs to be family friendly. In other words, it has to be G or PG rated. And I'm curious what your take is on that part of it, because again, if we go back, and especially like certain parts of Old and New Testament, if we read
oh my God, those things are hard R. I worked at the movie theater. I told you, under the MPAA guidelines, David's story is a hard R. I mean, we've got sex, violence. It's definitely an R-rated story.
Yeah, but then
and
also you look at a lot of the stories in the Bible, like Ezekiel, that's a horror movie. Like, a whole bunch of dead people just stand up in the middle of the desert and march on conquest. That's right. Army of Darkness. If you look at God himself and the way he's presented in the book, very Lovecraftian. I mean, it's a voice you hear inside your head most of the times that no one else can hear.
Yes, and then also further too, like we talk about that part, but then also we look into Christian history, because I remember in high school, one book that was really influential on me was the book Jesus Freaks, which was put out by Voice of the Martyrs. You read that one, or you read Tortured for Christ, like life is hard, right? And so this is, I think, one of the kind of interesting questions. You're looking to produce stuff specifically in this context. How do you balance or manage that expectation? Like, do you think it's possible to go beyond what we call like kid-friendly stuff? And if so, like, what do you think is the appropriate way to do that?
So absolutely. I agree with what you guys are saying. And the Old Testament is full of some hard R or worse stuff. When you're beheading priests and killing them and sacrificing them on their very altars, that's pretty hardcore.
Didn't some woman use a tent spike to stab a guy through his skull?
That was an escaping
to his
king.
temple. Yeah, that was jail. Yeah, absolutely.
Book of Judges.
She's actually she's in the Book of Judges, and she's in the Hall of Heroes, but in Hebrews. But the way you approach this is the way you approach any story. If you're telling it for a mass media market, once you have the idea for the story, you got to define who is the audience for this story. So, for instance, Chronicles of Faith is for boys and girls 7 to 11, primarily boys. And so you have to then, everything after that decision drives your decisions in production, right? The style that you're going to use, the colors that you're going to use, the writing style has to be at a certain level. You can't write at a college level for a 7-year-old kid. And Brainy Pixel is not scared of those things. As a matter of fact, my magnum opus and the show I want to most see made is I pitch it as a Christian Hellboy. called Tenant's Tales, and you can go to our website and see some stuff there. And it's very much on the hard R end of things, because I think there's a place for those sorts of stories, right? Not for 7 and 11-year-olds, but when you get to be my age, right, or maybe you're even a little younger than me, most people are ready for those sorts of ideas and those sorts of concepts, and you can reach those people using those sorts of stories, but you can still deliver light and truth. The fine balance you have to kind of navigate is not glorifying sin. You can show sin, but you show it in a way that it has negative consequences, because sin does have negative consequences, and that the light wins in the end, and that there is a redeeming moment to the story. And all of say, for instance, the Tenant Tales that I've written and produced are that way. There are monsters, there's violence, there's people getting shot and stabbed, but there's a moment where things shift and we realize what's really going on. It's a part of a bigger story where goodness and light has a place, and that place is triumphant. When I pitch the show, the way I pitch it is, those moments in the vampire movies when you have the priest and he holds his cross up to repel the vampire, and he's holding the cross, and then the vampire just laughs, and then the cross catches on fire, and the priest, is immolated. He catches on fire and he's killed. Well, in my world, he pulls the cross out and it catches on fire. Then he throws it down and says, "That's okay. I didn't need that anyway. In the name of Jesus, be dispelled." And then the vampire is blown away. I want to tell stories where the light wins, because that's what happens at the end of the book.